Back again for another deep dive, and this time we're tackling the Zodiac Killer.
Oh, this one.
This is a big one.
Mm.
You guys sent in tons of stuff, articles, documentaries, even some forum discussions about possible suspects.
Right, it's a rabbit hole.
So we're going to try to put it all together and hopefully bring something new to the table, or at least try to make sense of it all.
Definitely. And I think what makes it so intriguing, I mean, obviously it's unsolved, which is always a draw.
Right.
But he was just the way he taunted the police and the public with the ciphers and the cryptic messages, it adds a whole psychological element.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to understand any of that, we need to know the facts of the case, right? Where it all started.
Right.
So let's rewind all the way back to 1968, December 1968, Lake Herman Road.
Okay.
And we have our first confirmed victims of the Zodiac.
Yeah.
David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen,
Young couple.
a teenage couple, parked on this, like, lover's lane kind of road.
Classic.
Classic, right? And they were just brutally attacked, shot at close range.
Yeah, and that's what set the stage, you know? The brutality right from the beginning. David was shot in the head and Betty multiple times in the back as she tried to run away.
And it's interesting that they specifically mentioned the weapon that was used, a .22 caliber.
Yeah, and that becomes important later on because there's another crime that they think might be connected that happened even before this one.
Oh, okay, so we're already seeing those possible connections even from the first confirmed case.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how long he might have been active before he even got the name Zodiac.
Right, so we have Lake Herman Road in December of '68, and then fast forward just a few months, July of '69, Blue Rock Springs.
Another couple.
Another young couple, another secluded area, late at night.
It's almost like he had a type, right? Or a pattern.
Yeah, very specific MO, at least at this point. But there is one difference, right? The weapon.
Right. This time, he uses a 9mm pistol. So it raises questions, you know, was he evolving, getting bolder? Or maybe we're looking at a copycat at this point.
Oh, interesting. And you know what really struck me about the Blue Rock Springs attack was how the attacker approached the car. Like, shining a flashlight in their faces.
Yeah.
And they thought he was a police officer, so they rolled down the window.
Tragic mistake, tragically.
And, well, Darlene Ferrin was killed, but Michael McGough survived.
Played dead.
Played dead. Exactly.
Wow.
But here's where things get really creepy. Just minutes after the attack, there's a call to the Vallejo Police Department.
And on the other end of the line
is the killer.
The killer himself claiming responsibility for both Blue Rock Springs and the murders at Lake Herman Road. And it was in this call that he first uses the name Zodiac.
Chills, literal chills. Okay, so 2 attacks, an emerging signature, and now a name.
It's like he's stepping out of the shadows.
Exactly. And it's about to get even more terrifying because in September of '69, we have the Lake Berryessa attack. And this is where things get really, really disturbing.
Yeah, this one wasn't just an attack. It was like a whole staged event, you know?
Right. He's not just targeting victims in secluded locations anymore. He's putting on a show. So, at Lake Berryessa, we have Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, another couple. Picnicking, yeah. And he approaches them wearing this hooded costume with the Zodiac symbol on it.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
I know. And he ties them up, but with pre-cut lengths of clothesline. So the premeditation is just chilling. And then he stabs them repeatedly.
Brutal. Celia unfortunately didn't make it, but Brian did. And his account is one of the most detailed descriptions we have of the attacker.
Right, and not just the attacker, but his costume, too. And to make matters worse, as if the attack itself wasn't enough, he leaves a message on Brian's car door.
Written in black marker.
In black marker. And it's got the dates of the previous attacks, the Zodiac symbol, like a scorecard almost.
It's like he's bragging, claiming ownership of his crimes.
Exactly, and that's a pattern that's going to continue. So fast forward again, October of '69, San Francisco, and we have the last officially attributed murder, Paul Stein, a cab driver.
Yeah, this one is different. He's not in a secluded area anymore. It's broad daylight, a busy street.
Right, and he just shoots Stein in the head, takes his wallet and keys, and disappears.
Melts into the city.
Melts into the city. But before he goes, he takes a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, a bloody piece of his shirt, and sends it to the San Francisco Chronicle with a letter claiming the murder.
A trophy.
A trophy, right. It's like he needs to prove it to make sure everyone knows it was him.
I think it shows how much he craved that notoriety. It wasn't just about the killing. It was about the fear, the control, the attention.
Okay, so we've got 4 confirmed attacks, a clear MO that seems to be evolving, these taunting messages, and a killer who just vanishes. It's no wonder this case became an obsession for investigators.
And for the public.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about the man who has been at the center of this investigation for decades, Arthur Lee Allen.
Hold on, before we jump into Allen, I think it's important to remember something. The Zodiac claimed way more victims, like a lot more.
Oh, right. He claimed 37 in his last letter.
37. So even if Allen is a key figure, the full picture might be much bigger.
Wow, that's a terrifying thought. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get into Arthur Lee Allen. Who was this guy?
Well, he was a former elementary school teacher, lived in Vallejo at the time of the murders, and he was also a convicted sex offender.
And the sources we've got paint a pretty disturbing picture of him, like obsessed with codes and ciphers. He even owned a Zodiac brand watch.
Similar to one found at a crime scene, yeah.
And some people claimed he'd talked about wanting to kill people and call himself Zodiac.
There's even a 2024 Netflix documentary, This is the Zodiac Speaking, and they interview people who were close to Allen.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
They actually claim he confessed to being the Zodiac right before he died.
Right before he died. Wow. But wait, didn't the police already investigate him for years? What happened with all of that?
They did. It's a long story, lots of twists and turns. He was interviewed multiple times, his house was searched, they compared his handwriting, fingerprints, the whole 9 yards.
What did they find?
Well, there was stuff that pointed to him, but it was never enough to make a solid connection. Like, handwriting samples were inconclusive, and early DNA testing using saliva from a Zodiac letter didn't match.
Hold on, I read somewhere that there were conflicting DNA results.
You're right. Later on, they did more advanced testing on a different sample from the letters.
Oh, okay.
And that one came back inconclusive. They couldn't say for sure if it was him or not.
So it's like almost enough to close the case, but not quite.
Exactly. He was a prime suspect right up until he died in '92, but the case was never closed.
So it's still possible he was the Zodiac, but we just don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's frustrating, right? All these tantalizing clues, but no smoking gun.
Definitely. Okay, so if it wasn't definitively Allen, who else was on the radar?
Well, the list of possible suspects is long, but there are a few that really stand out.
Oh, let's hear it. Who are we talking about?
One is Richard Gaikowski. He was a newspaper reporter who worked near some of the crime scenes.
Gaikowski. Wasn't there something about his name and one of the Zodiac ciphers?
Yes. The name Geik appeared, and some people thought it could be a connection. Plus, he kind of looked like the composite sketch.
Interesting. But they must have checked his DNA, right?
They tried, but he refused to give a sample.
That's suspicious, but it doesn't automatically make him guilty, right?
No, of course not. But it definitely makes you wonder. Then there's Gary Francis' post. He was identified much later, in 2021, by this team of independent investigators, the Case Breakers.
I remember that. They were all over the news. Didn't they claim to have some pretty strong evidence?
They did. Photographs, anagrams, all sorts of stuff that they said pointed to Post. But a lot of people were skeptical, law enforcement included.
So another promising lead that fizzled out.
Pretty much, yeah. The FBI said the case was still open, and there wasn't enough to connect Post to the crimes, for sure. And then there's Earl Van Best Jr.
Ah, this is the one where the son claims his own father was the Zodiac, right?
Yeah, pretty wild story. He even gave the police photos and handwriting samples of his dad. But again, no concrete evidence to back it up. It's amazing how many people have come forward over the years claiming to know who the Zodiac was.
It's got to be tough for the victims' families and for the investigators who spent years on this case.
Absolutely. It shows you that even with all the technology and advancements we have now, some mysteries might just stay mysteries.
Okay, so we've covered the confirmed victims and some of the main suspects. But now I want to talk about something that's always creeped me out about this case. The unconfirmed victims.
This is where things get even murkier. We're going from hard evidence to speculation where every unsolved murder from that time period could be a Zodiac case.
Right, and he did claim to have killed way more than those 4 victims. So where do we even start with all this?
Let's go back even further than the confirmed Zodiac killings. 1966, the murder of Cherie Jo Bates.
I vaguely remember hearing about this one. She's a college student, right? And there was something about a handwritten letter.
Yes. She was a student at Riverside City College, and the letter is one of the main reasons people think this case might be connected to the Zodiac. It was sent to the police and a local newspaper, and it had details about the murder that weren't public knowledge.
Wow, so even back then he was playing those mind games.
It seems like it. The problem is there's no proof it was actually written by the Zodiac. Some experts think the handwriting is similar, but it's mostly circumstantial.
So another possible lead, but not definitive.
Exactly. Although just this year there was a new development. Riverside police actually identified the author of the letter through DNA.
Wait, really? Was it the Zodiac?
No, it turned out to be some troubled teenager who was looking for attention. So unfortunately, another dead end.
This case is full of twists and turns, that's for sure. Okay, let's move on to another one that always sends chills down my spine, Kathleen Johns.
Ah, yes. The alleged abduction on Highway 132 in 1970. A terrifying story.
So terrifying. She was driving with her baby daughter, and this guy stops her, says her tire is loose.
Classic trait.
Right. And after he fixes it, he offers her a ride to a gas station, but then he drives her around for hours, threatening to kill her and her baby.
It's a nightmare scenario. Thankfully, she managed to escape with her daughter, and her car was later found burned.
And she even identified her abductor as the Zodiac from a wanted poster.
She did. But there are some inconsistencies in her story, and some people doubt whether it happened the way she described it. It's another one of those cases that's shrouded in mystery.
Okay, one more we need to talk about. Donna Lass.
The missing nurse from South Lake Tahoe. She disappeared in 1970, and it's never been solved.
Right. And this one is particularly intriguing because of a postcard that was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle a few months after she vanished.
It was a collage of random advertisements, and one of them was for this resort in South Lake Tahoe called Forest Pines.
Wait, Forest Pines? Isn't that it?
Exactly. And the postcard had Sierra Club written at the top and Peek Through the Pines at the bottom. A lot of people think this was the Zodiac's way of telling everyone he'd taken Donna Lass.
Like a twisted riddle.
It's like he was playing with the police, using the media as his messenger.
It's so creepy. And didn't they recently identify her remains?
They did, just this year. They used genetic genealogy to finally figure out who the remains belonged to. But so far, there's still no solid evidence linking her disappearance to the Zodiac.
Man, these unconfirmed cases just add a whole other layer of tragedy and complexity to this whole story.
They do. It's impossible to say for sure if he was responsible, but the timing, the MO, it's all very unsettling.
Okay, before we move on, we have to talk about one more crucial element of the Zodiac case. The ciphers.
Yes, the ciphers. The Zodiac's most infamous calling card.
Right. It was like he was obsessed with them, taunting the police, the media, everyone, daring them to crack the code.
I think they offer a unique window into his mind, you know? They show us his arrogance, his need for control, his belief that he was playing a game that only he could win.
And remember, not all of them have been solved.
Yeah, that's right. Some are still out there, like the Z13 cipher, taunting code breakers to this day. But the most famous one, the 408 symbol cipher, was cracked back in '69 by a school teacher and his wife.
That was the one where he said he wasn't going to reveal his name, but that he was killing to collect slaves for the aftermath.
Okay, that's the one. And then, decades later, in 2020, a team of codebreakers finally solved the 340 symbol cipher. That one had baffled investigators for years.
And what did that one say? Did it finally give us some answers?
Sadly, no. It was more of his rambling, egotistical stuff, but no real clues to his identity. Just more fuel for the fire of his legend, really.
It's almost like he wanted to make sure that even if they never caught him, the mystery would live on forever.
And you could say he succeeded. The Zodiac case is one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in history. It fascinates and terrifies people, and it probably will for generations to come.
He's become more than just a criminal. He's like a cultural icon, a symbol of that darkness that's always lurking out there.
Exactly. And while we might never know who he really was, the quest to understand him, to figure out why he did it, is what keeps drawing us back in.
Well, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. The confirmed murders, the prime suspect, the unsettling world of the unconfirmed victims. And of course, we touched on the ciphers, those chilling puzzles that he left behind.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So I think it's time to take a breath, maybe grab a drink, and then come back for part 2, where we're going to dive into some of the theories behind his motives, the psychology of the killer.
Yeah, we'll try to get inside his head, see if we can make sense of any of it.
That was good to me.
Okay, so we've laid out like the basic facts, the timeline, the victims, the suspects, but now it gets really interesting for me. We get to like speculate, theories, the what ifs that make this case so fascinating.
I love the theories. It's like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. What's got you hooked right now?
Well, for me, the biggest question is why? Why did he do it? Was it all just about power and control, like some people say? Or was there something more to it, something darker?
Yeah, I mean, the sources we have mention a bunch of different theories about the Zodiac's motives. One that pops up a lot is this idea that he felt inadequate, like he was lacking something, and he tried to compensate for it through violence and domination.
Right. That's a classic serial killer profile, isn't it? A lot of psychologists think that these guys They feel powerless in their everyday lives, so they lash out in this extreme way to gain control.
And the Zodiac definitely seemed to be obsessed with control. The way he planned his attacks, the messages, the ciphers. It was like he was always one step ahead, pulling the strings.
Exactly. And the ciphers especially, it's like he wanted to prove how smart he was, how he was smarter than the cops, smarter than everyone else, like a big intellectual pissing contest.
It's so messed up. And then there's the theory that he was just obsessed with death, you know? Like he got off on the power of taking a life, playing God.
Yeah, that's another common thread in these kinds of cases. For some people, death holds a weird fascination, and the act of killing becomes the ultimate expression of power.
But remember how he said in one of the ciphers he was killing to collect slaves for the afterlife? I mean, that's pretty out there.
Right. It makes you wonder if he was suffering from some kind of mental illness, maybe even psychosis. I mean, you'd have to be pretty far gone mentally to do the things he did, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Although it's tough to diagnose someone from afar. But his behavior, the messages, those grandiose claims, it all seems pretty disturbed, right?
Definitely. And some experts have even thrown out the idea of multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder.
Wait, like he had different personalities, and each one was responsible for different parts of the crimes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a fringe theory, but it could explain some of the inconsistencies in his behavior, like the way he would go through these periods of intense activity and then suddenly go quiet for months.
It's like he was two different people trapped in one body, each with their own motives and plans. Okay, so we've got power and control, death obsession, mental illness. Any other theories we should throw into the mix?
Well, there's one more that I think is really interesting, and it has to do with the time period he was operating in, like the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, you mean like the whole counterculture movement, Vietnam War, all that social and political turmoil?
Exactly. Think about it. The Zodiac was active during this time of massive change and upheaval. Everything was being questioned. Traditional values were breaking down. There was this underlying feeling of anxiety and uncertainty.
So are you saying he was like a product of his time? That the chaos of that era somehow fueled his crimes?
It's a possibility, right? Maybe he saw himself as some kind of vigilante, bringing chaos to a world that he felt was already spiraling out of control.
That's a pretty dark thought. But it kind of fits with his whole persona, you know? He seemed to get a kick out of the fear and disruption he was causing.
Absolutely. So we've got some possible motives, but what about the man himself? What kind of person was he? I mean, based on what we know, what does the profile suggest?
Well, he was definitely intelligent, that's for sure. To evade capture for so long, to come up with those elaborate ciphers, you need brains.
Right. And organized, too. The way he planned his attacks, everything was thought out in advance.
Meticulous. And don't forget about the psychological aspect. He loved the attention, the notoriety. It was like fuel for him. Classic narcissism.
Definitely. And another chilling thing is he was able to live this seemingly normal life while committing these horrific crimes.
Yeah, talk about compartmentalizing. To be able to separate those dark urges from your everyday life, that's scary.
It's a classic trait of psychopaths, the ability to switch back and forth between different personas.
Okay, I want to circle back to the ciphers for a minute. We talked about them in terms of his motive, but I'm curious about the actual codes themselves. What kind of ciphers did he use, and how hard were they to break?
So the two most famous ones, the 408 symbol cipher and the 340 symbol cipher, those were both substitution ciphers.
Substitution, meaning each letter is replaced with a different symbol.
Exactly. Now, the 408 symbol cipher was relatively simple, and a schoolteacher and his wife cracked it pretty quickly just a few days after it was published.
But the 340 symbol cipher, that one took over 50 years to solve.
It did. It took a whole team of international code breakers using some serious computer power to finally crack it.
It's crazy to think that even after all that effort, those ciphers didn't actually reveal who he was.
I know. The 408 symbol cipher was basically a rambling, egotistical rant, gave us some insight into his mindset, but no real clues to his identity. And the 340, just as disappointing. No names, no locations, nothing concrete.
So it was more about the game, the challenge, the power trip of it all than actually wanting to be caught.
Exactly. He wanted to leave everyone baffled, to create this legacy of unsolved puzzles that would drive people crazy.
And it's working. Okay, so we've talked motives, psychology, ciphers. Anything else we should consider before we move on to the final part of our deep dive?
I think it's important to remember that despite all these theories, all the speculation, the Zodiac case remains unsolved. We may never know for sure who he was or why he did what he did.
Yeah, but isn't that part of what makes this case so fascinating? The mystery, the unanswered questions, the possibility that the truth is still out there somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's that mystery that keeps us coming back, keeps us searching for answers, even after all these years. And in a way, I think the Zodiac knew that. He knew how to play the game, how to keep people hooked. It's like he created his own legend, one that will probably never die.
Right. So we've gone deep into the Zodiac's mind, the motives, the psychology, all that. But now I want to talk about something a bit different. His legacy. Like, what impact did he have on popular culture,
Right.
and why are we still talking about him, like 50 years later?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? He's become this cultural icon, a boogeyman almost. There have been so many books, movies, documentaries, even fictional characters inspired by the Zodiac.
Right. It's like he achieved that notoriety he was craving. He's infamous. But why are we still so obsessed with this case?
I think there's a few reasons. First, the mystery itself is unsolved, so it keeps people guessing. Like, we love a good puzzle, and this is the ultimate puzzle with huge stakes.
Yeah, and the way he taunted everyone, the police, the media, it's like he was writing his own story, controlling the narrative.
Exactly. He knew how to keep people hooked, how to create this aura of fear and mystery around himself. And it worked. I mean, look at us. We're still talking about him.
We are. And let's not forget the time period. The late 60s, early 70s, it was such a turbulent time, so much change and uncertainty. I think his crimes tapped into that fear that was already there.
I agree. He became this symbol of the darkness lurking beneath the surface, like a reminder that even in a time of progress, evil can still exist.
And that fear, that unease, it still resonates with us today. We live in a world where things can feel pretty chaotic. So I think the Zodiac story kind of reminds us that we're not really that far removed from that darkness.
That's a good point. His case has become this touchstone, a way for us to examine our own anxieties about evil and violence. And because it's unsolved, we can kind of project our own feels onto it, fill in the blanks with our imaginations.
So it's become like a modern myth, a cautionary tale that gets passed down through generations, and each generation finds its own meaning in it.
Exactly. And as long as the mystery remains unsolved, that fascination will probably never die.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, the murders, the suspects, the victims, the ciphers, the theories. But the big question remains unanswered. Who was the Zodiac Killer?
Yeah, it's a question that has haunted investigators for over 50 years, and we may never truly know. But maybe that's okay.
What do you mean?
Well, the mystery is part of what makes it so compelling, right? It forces us to confront the fact that some things may always remain hidden, that the search for truth can be a long and winding road with no guaranteed destination.
True. And I think that's why this case will always hold a special place in true crime history. It's a reminder that even in a world of technology and advancements, some secrets will always remain elusive.
Exactly. The Zodiac may be a ghost from the past, but his shadow still looms large. A reminder that the darkness is never truly that far away.
Well, that's a chilling thought to end on. But I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Zodiac case. It's been a wild ride.
It has. Lots of twists and turns, just like the case itself.
And to all of you listening, thanks for sending in your research and questions. Keep them coming, because we'll be back with another deep dive soon. Until then, stay curious, stay vigilant, and maybe sleep with the lights on tonight, just in case